thanks for the work that Glenn has done and the information you saw with Sam and Glenn last hour was just really impressive. I call Glenn the poop, the Ohio poop godfather. I mean, the round of applause was warranted. So thanks for Glenn for all the work he's done. When we're putting this together, Glenn said, "Hey, we got a whole room dedicated to Manure for half a day or a day this year," and so I'd like to. I'm privileged to be able to share some information with you about utilizing liquid cattle manure and growing corn. The situation, cattle manure production in Ohio, we have, as of the 2016 NASS data, about 265,000 dairy cows in the state, producing just over 2.5 billion gallons of liquid manure a year, and that's kind of a moving target depending on moisture and some things like that. Obviously, you've seen lots and lots of large facilities for dairy cows, pulling manure out of lagoons, in some cases concrete storage facilities. And I mentioned up there that last line was our beef facilities are moving to slat barns. And in Fulton County, we just had, in the last 3 years, we had a nice producer, cattle integrator that built approximately a 500 head slat barn, and just across the border into Henry County, another producer that built about a 350 head slat barn with 12-foot deep pits. And we can talk about the feed efficiency that these folks realize in those barns as compared to a straw stack barn or a manure pack barn, but that's not really our purpose today. But if you want to know more about that, those producers will say that their cattle get to market about 30 days, about a month earlier. So that's one of the reasons to move to that direction. The barn smells less, the manure's better, cattle do better. Just really exciting to see these. You've seen the J-bunk barns, the big barns that we have throughout the state. When I look at the top counties in Ohio cattle production, I kind of cherry pick some counties. So no counties are bigger than Wayne County down here with 96,000 beef cattle and 34,000 dairy cattle, but Mercer and Darke County are close behind. These are not necessarily the top 10, but these are ones that I looked at in NASS data quite quickly and kind of referenced different parts of the state. So Auglaize, Columbiana, Darke, Fulton, Mercer, Paulding, Putnam, Shelby, Stark, and Wayne County all jumped out off the page. And so if you're from one of those counties, I guess pay attention. You make up in the cattle industry about 29% of that 1.2 million beef cattle in the state. And if you're in the dairy cattle, if you're in one of those counties, about 106,000 dairy cows, or 40% of the 266,000 cows. So that's kind of just some background on the cattle that we have out there. Obviously, they're moving towards, I would argue, for ease of handling, a lot of facilities are moving towards liquid, both on the beef side, on the feeder cattle side, and obviously already on the dairy side. So today, in 30 minutes, I'd like to cover 3 objectives with you. I'd like to cover 3 things. First of all, I'd like to go through some dairy plot information, some of which you saw with Glenn, some that occurred in Fulton County that I'll share with you, full-length, field-length research plots. Secondly, I'd like to go over the liquid beef plots that just made it to the scenes. We first did those in 2016. So we have 4 plots across Fulton, Henry, and Paulding County in the northwest corner of the state here. And then finally, I'm probably an economics guy quicker than agronomics or animal science, and so we're going to wrap up with economics because I think that sells to farmers and livestock growers. So this is in Fulton County we have, we're not a huge dairy, not a huge swine county, but that's changing, especially on the swine side of things. We've had 3 barns built in the last 2 years, 3 double wides, and most of those facilities are going to add a second double wide. So Glenn talked about swine manure. This is our 1 permitted dairy facility, and we got 2 other permitted swine facilities in the county. I believe that's going to change as the livestock industry changes. But this is kind of the situation as we're going to do on-farm plots. This is a plot that we did in 2014 with a large dairy, North Wauseon. But before I get to that, I'm going to refer to some of the small plot data that Glenn showed you a little bit earlier, that he did with the small plot tankers. I'm going to kind of fast forward through this. He showed you this data, and I boxed the data on dairy. So again, pre-emergent treatments at the top, incorporated dairy manure. If you look at that versus surface applied in a pre-emergent situation, in every situation they're about 15 to 20 bushels per acre better. The only years where it's more than that were the drought years of 2012 and the monsoon year of 2015. So file that in your brain. The manure did better, incrementally better on the dry year and the wet year. Now, if I come down here, and this is really where I want to talk, these post-emergent or in-season applications. In 12, we were 139 versus 101, 192 versus 181, 157, 125. For the average, I'll fast forward and get you to the average. When you look at incorporated, I put these two ovals up here to drive this point home. The incorporated below the surface, the placement gains you, in this case, it gained 32 bushels on the dairy manure. In the post-emergent situation, we gained 29 bushels. Okay, so approximately 30 bushels just by figuring out a way to get it injected. Okay. Additionally, I want to make the comparison to the check, to 28%. In both cases, pre-emergent. When I look at this incorporated, because I'm only going to talk from this point forward on incorporated, 158 pre-emergent incorporated versus 142 with incorporated, 28%. Again, about a 16 bushel gain. Glenn referenced that earlier on some swine manure plots. On the dairy manure, if I come down here, I got 165 incorporated in season. So this is side dress dairy manure versus side dress 28%. 145 versus 165, a 20 bushel gain over the 28% check strips. Okay, replicated check strips. So that's small plot data. From small plot data, we wanted to move to on-farm data, or on-farm field length strips. Okay, when I talk to farmers and groups like this, I think there's a great comparison between small plot data, but sometimes that's a bit ideal. And so the on-farm field length data is interesting and intriguing. And we replicate and randomize, so we try and address the field variation. Ironically, this is a producer who handles dry pack manure compost in our county, and he plants in twin rows, and he took the manure from the permitted dairy facility, who he does some other dry pack work for, very progressive, and trying some things. This is twin row corn. Twin row corn in 2014 we did our plot on. I would argue that was somewhat crazy. Glenn, I don't know how many stalks of corn, how much he reduced the population, but Glenn was driving this and had about, 22, 23 inches in between the rows to sneak everything down. So very quick, this is just one plot that we did in 14, but very quickly, 30 gallons of 28%, had about 143 bushels, 9,000 gallons of liquid dairy manure, really had low nitrogen. I'm going to talk a lot about this plot because I think it really should have been spiked. It was my first year doing manure plots, and maybe I was a little bit hurried and kind of try and get this plot done, but it was not what I would argue great manure. The nutrient value was not great manure. It was 3.4 N, 5.6 P, 7.4 K per 1,000 gallons. Take that times 9, and you're really only looking at a pretty low nitrogen content. So not a perfect plot, but the data in the end showed we were no significant difference. So I want to move forward to our 2016 dairy plots, and these were all sand-based beddings, and I'm showing you the liquid dairy manure samples from 4 different barns across Fulton, Paulding, Dark, and Henry County. And so you look at these, and not all manure is created equal, and I think you may have heard Glenn say that. This pit in particular had a lower nitrogen rate, ammonium nitrogen of just under 6 pounds per 1,000, and everything else was in double digits. I think that's important to note. So lagoon management, manure management, important. I'm not sure the details beyond these. This is some information gathered from Glenn. But when you take the full ammonium nitrogen rate and half of the organic nitrogen that comes available that year, and then you take the P2O5 and the K2O, the potassium that's available, you average 15, 17, 19 per 1,000 gallons. That was the nutrient analysis per 1,000 gallons put on. Our target rate for these 4 plots was approximately 6,000 gallons of manure, and it was spiked with 10 gallons of 28%. And here's an example of this is spiking, having a 28% tank right nearby and spiking that nitrogen as it went, or spiking that manure as it went to the field. As you put it on, again, we're in tanker plots. Our goal is ultimately to get to dragline plots, but if you got a pretty good driver, it looks just like side dress corn, and you're getting all that moisture and you're getting organic matter. It's not always perfect though, and so it's not always perfect, especially in Darke County. Sam's in the back, and this is an issue that Sam ran into when he was doing one of his dairy manure plots. So I thought. Glenn gave me that picture as contraband for Sam, so you see him getting his boots dirty a little bit. Finally getting them dirty. So let's talk yield. When we look at these 4 sites, I'm sorry I said this incorrectly, Darke, Henry, Putnam, and Paulding, when you make comparisons, everything, 222 versus 224, 161 versus 163, 147, 148, 146, 152, at most there was a six bushel difference. Okay, I think that was probably as much due to a dry start to the summer last year. Each of these plots were applied with that same manure tanker and Dietrich toolbar that you. Yes, it was the green Balzer tank. So with Dietrich toolbar on it. In only one case did we compare to anhydrous ammonia. That was a producer choice, and so takeaway here is if we spike our dairy manure. We can compete with our 28% competition, so to speak. My quick takeaways on a dairy lagoon before I switch to beef. The dairy lagoon's higher moisture. We're obviously going to run it at a higher rate, 8 to 10,000 gallons per acre, maybe more than that. May need to spike it with 10 to 15 pounds or 3 to 5 gallons of 28% per acre. I think in the dairy lagoon situation, it's important to have relationships with land-based neighbors. Okay, not just consumer neighbors, civilian neighbors, but with land-based neighbors. Glenn talked about frac tanks and potentially building our levels. You need to be able to, or be willing and open-minded to the idea of transferring that manure to other areas of your land base. I say that frac tanks, you'll see in beef barns, I'll say it differently, that location is important as we build new slat barns, but most of our dairy farmsteads are already established. Okay, it's not, we're not gonna build a new, or slowly we may build a new dairy barn, and all those folks take that location into consideration. So let's transfer to liquid steer manure or beef manure. This is an example of one of the slat barns. I believe this is in the Paulding County barn, slat barn, great storage, excellent storage for manure. You don't need a manure tanker, you drag line it. There's lots of advantages, and again, I already alluded to the feed efficiency. If you're a cattle producer, you like to talk feed efficiency and days to market. So, again, we pumped out of this 12-foot pit. This is the barn in Fulton County, pumped out of a deep pit to the plot tanker that Glenn uses and drives all over the northwest corner of the state. I was fortunate to have an intern who was willing to grab our liquid manure samples, and he was just Ben Eggers, a senior at Ohio State, just be a great employee for somebody. So very willing to help out with manure plots. So I'm going to compare. This is a little bit different. Okay, my understanding is this may be the first time some of you have seen some liquid beef manure plots. So I think it's important to notice the percent moisture. If I went back to the dairy manure, most of those were in the 96 to 97, 95, 96, 97% moisture. Very, very low solids, very high moisture. This beef manure is much different. It's 10% solids. In both cases, this is an 89.9, essentially 90% solids. When you get into the, I wish I had circles on here for you, but the total nitrogen, almost the same, but there's a key difference in the manure and in the nitrogen in these two barns. There's 23% or 23 pounds per 1,000 gallons in the Paulding County barn and 33 pounds of ammonia nitrogen in the Fulton County barn. From my understanding, this is a pit additive difference. This is a quick study in pit additives, okay? And so if you want to increase your ammonia nitrogen because you're going in season, you may want to do a little bit of studying on pit additives, not just for fly control and smell control, but because it makes better manure. So when you look at both of these and you take half of this organic nitrogen and add it to it, it's about 39 pounds per 1,000. When you take half of this 15 and put it with it, it's approximately 39 or 40. So when you do the full analysis, 39, 32, 34 per 1,000 gallons, it doesn't take an agronomist to figure out that's pretty good poop. Okay, that's pretty good poop. So our target rate was lower than our dairy manure plots. It also flowed like pudding already. Go back up here. It took us probably the third or fourth load to get geared down slow enough to get to 4,000 gallons. We believe on our first couple of strips, first couple of replications, we may have been down at that 2,000 gallons per acre rate. So flows like pudding because of this low percent moisture, high percent solids. Again, we put it on similar. This is a picture you saw with Glenn's presentation. We put it on the same way. In both situations, in one of the Fulton County sites and also on the Paulding County site, very dry start to 2016. You can tell that by the crusting that was here. Just had somewhat of a stressful start to the 2016 year. So when we get to yield, again, as you may suspect, no significant difference. Almost 2 bushel difference between the manure and the commercial fertilizer. Manure and commercial fertilizer, 220, 218, 136, 147. That was an anhydrous ammonia situation. Not sure why that was 11 bushels difference, but statistically speaking, I don't have my letters up here, my LSD, but statistically speaking, there was no statistical difference in even that Paulding plot. So side dress liquid beef manure plots can be competitive with commercial nitrogen. I inserted in here on this Henry County plot, this producer wanted to compare. He is traditionally an anhydrous ammonia applicator, and so in his plot, this is just one site of data, beef manure versus 28% versus anhydrous ammonia. So approximately in that 4,000 gallons of beef manure versus 28 versus anhydrous, we had about 165 units of N put on at side dress. No statistical difference in yield. All right in that 220 bushels per acre. Okay. This plot, we also did cornstalk nitrate tests at the end of the season, right in the Purdue sweet spot of 250 parts to 2,000 parts per million of nitrate nitrogen. Feel really good about that plot and how that producer is using that manure to replace commercial nitrogen. Had my former intern actually, I think he flew a personal drone. I'm going to say personal drone because I don't know. It wasn't commercial. So, but can you see the manure? Can you see where manure was applied in that overhead shot? You see these green streaks, dark green? So to me, just an interesting picture, about, it was pre-tossal, but early in the growing season. Again, that same kind of field. Not a lot of difference. Of course, with liquid beef manure, still looking to do the same thing that Glenn was up here. Glenn and Sam were talking about, trying to get in-season application. This is the exact picture you saw at Herod Farms down in Darke County. And Glenn was right. This is a toolbar that sits at this point in Fulton County, and we had a breakfast meeting last Friday with growers who produce a lot of liquid manure, and we have this toolbar. It's a little bit different system. The private individual farm owns it, but they're looking to rent this toolbar at a said price. And we're trying to coordinate. We have some dollars to incentivize three different growers for the next 3 years, over 3 years, to to rent this toolbar from the one farmer to try some demonstration plots. Of course, there'll be a check strip left. There are 3 check strips left because we want to capture data on behalf of other, or to share with other producers. But this is a unit that was built by Baumbauers, and it is kind of this splash it on top and cover it up type system, but all made to go down the road. And we're hoping to use it in about the 4-county area in Northwest Ohio. So, liquid beef manure takeaways, lower moisture, great nitrogen numbers, no spiking needed, rich in P and K. The pit additive created 10 pounds per 1,000 gallons of nitrogen, something to study. Starting rate, 4,000 gallon. Examine the economics of in-season. This is where I'm coming to next. And then the location, where you site that barn, hugely important. Just as important as new hog barn situations. So in about 5 minutes, I want to just talk about economics. So this barn, this 400 and 500 head finisher that I've been talking about, is a 65 by 120 by 12 foot deep pit. Approximately, they empty it before it's clear full, but it's about 1 million gallons. So I'm going to talk about 1 million gallons as I talk about the barn, the value of the barn full of manure. Okay, but let's talk first on pounds per gallon. We had the analysis. I went back to the producer up here. Their manure was 41.2530 per 1,000. When you take that times a 4x rate, 164, 100, 120, the value of that, and I'll show you where I got those values. But when you look at these numbers at a 4,000 gallon rate, very similar to what Glenn was talking on a 6,500 gallon per acre rate on pig manure, it's enough nutrients for 200 bushel corn and next year's 50 bushel bean crop. Okay? Where did I get those dollar amounts? It's based on our cheapest source of anhydrous, $500 a ton or 30 cents a unit, $4.50 MAP for 43 cents, $2.95 potash for 25 cents a pound, based on the December 2016 DTN fertilizer price index. So I just wanted to make sure that we were all on the same page of where I got those numbers. Okay, that you might be able to do better than that at your retailer, but that's where I'm going right now. Does the application timing change the value per acre? Well, if you put it on a growing crop, is what the target is, you're getting all that value, approximately 123 per acre. If you put it on pre-plant corn, we're going to argue that you're going to lose 20 to 25% of that N. And so you reduce that nitrogen number, you only got $110 or $111 per acre. If you put it on after wheat, okay, which is a heavy suggestion right now, we're going to lose all of that ammonia N. There will be some organic N that you'll capture, but generally speaking, if I can value that ammonia N as though it were anhydrous ammonia or nitrate nitrogen, I'm going to lose that value after the wheat, coming up with approximately $73 per acre versus 123. Who wants to give up $50 an acre? The discussion, the question is, could you plant a cover crop? And that's a great question. Similarly, with a cover crop and organic nitrogen, we're always concerned about when that's releasing. Okay, I think that's a discussion point too. And I'm probably taking a hard line on the 0% nitrogen, so we probably stand up here and argue about that. But just for discussion's sake. So then I say, well, what about the barn? So what about 1 million gallon liquid pit? On a growing crop, my nitrogen's worth 12,500. For all those nutrients, 31,000. If I do pre-plant corn, 28,000. If I do it in the fall after wheat, okay, 18,500. How many of you are willing to leave $12,000 on the table? And that barn, for 0.8 cents, would have hauled with a dragline guy, would have hauled for about $8,000. Okay, so maybe a hard line on the 0 after wheat, but it's something to think about. I already summed up most of my discussion points. Co-owning equipment, build your barns to accommodate fast loading and drag lining. That comes from a drag line guy. Assume there will be tighter regulation. And my suggestion is build a barn assuming that the best environmental and economic way to use manure is on a growing crop. And I think Glenn has proved that time and time again. The new producers who are typically young in their 20s, that are building double-wide hog barns. My question to them is, do you think you could build those barns and never let a gallon, so to speak, of manure see the daylight? You build your barn and be environmentally responsible enough to get that manure hauled so that your manure never sees daylight. It's a thought.